Welcome, dear listeners. Tonight, let your thoughts drift gently as we take you on a peaceful journey. This is a space for calm, for quiet moments, and for the kind of stories that settle your heart and slow your breath. Make yourself comfortable, close your eyes if you wish, and allow the world to soften around you. Now, let's begin with tonight's story. Today's story is titled, The Dreamers of Aradai. Act 1, The Whisper of Forgotten Shores. There were days when Thelen felt like a ghost in his own life. Not the chilling kind that haunted dark corridors, but a silent echo, a flicker of someone who had once laughed louder, dreamed bigger, and believed the world still had magic tucked between the cracks of reality. Now, everything felt thin. Paper thin. Days blended together like overexposed photographs, and the city around him, a sprawling jungle of noise, glass, and glowing screens, seemed to grow louder just to drown out the silence within. Thelen was 36. A designer by trade, he shaped digital worlds while quietly feeling like he'd lost the thread of his own. He lived alone in a modest apartment on the 15th floor, windows overlooking the hum of downtown. Evenings were filled with deadlines and decaf, sometimes interrupted by a memory that crept in like fog, soft and uninvited. A wave, a gull's cry, or the scent of rain on pavement would pull him briefly into the past. And lately, that pull had grown stronger. One Saturday morning, after waking from a dream he couldn't quite remember but left him oddly breathless, Thelen stood staring at an old photograph he kept in the back of a drawer. It was crinkled and sun-faded, a snapshot of a boy standing barefoot on a shoreline, hair messy from the wind, grinning like he had just discovered a hidden kingdom. Behind him, the lighthouse, tall and weather-worn, framed by cliffs and sea. That was once home. A coastal island called Windmere, remote, sleepy, forgotten by time. Thelen hadn't set foot there in 20 years. He didn't know what shifted that morning. Maybe it was the dream, or maybe the silence had become too loud. But something inside him cracked open like driftwood underfoot. He packed a small bag, booked the next ferry, and with barely a note to his colleagues, set out to find whatever waited on that island or within himself. The ferry rocked gently as it cut through the steel blue water, the air thick with salt and the cries of distant gulls. Thelen leaned against the railing, fingers clenched around the photograph, as the silhouette of Windmere began to form on the horizon, cliffs draped in mist, pines swaying like watchers from another age. He hadn't expected the surge of feeling. It was like memory and presence collided all at once. The salty wind felt like a familiar hand brushing his cheek. The scent of wild rosemary and pine came rushing back as if someone had uncorked a sealed bottle of his childhood. When the boat docked, the town was just as he remembered, and yet not. Cobblestone streets still lined the harbor, the bell tower still stood watch over the bay, and fishermen in yellow slickers hauled nets under the morning drizzle. But shops had changed names, faces had grown older, and the world had not paused for him. He walked in a haze toward the village's edge, where the old road veered up a hill toward the cliffs. That road, it used to be his runway, his escape path, his childhood adventure trail. Now it felt like stepping into a sacred dream. Each footstep up the gravel path stirred more than dust. It stirred echoes. Laughter. Shouts of games long ended. Songs sung into the wind. The Len paused by the fence post where he once carved his name with a pocket knife, and there it was. Faded, moss-covered, but still legible, T. H. He smiled, and for a moment, the years peeled away. The house was no longer his, of course. It had been sold after his parents left for the mainland. But standing beyond the overgrown garden and watching the porch where he once sat eating lemon ice in summer, he could feel his younger self watching him too, curious, wondering what became of them. The Len didn't try to enter. Not yet. That would come later. For now, he walked. Past the gates. Past the bending trees. Toward the lighthouse cliff, where the sea sang louder. And as he reached the bluff, breath short, chest aching with the weight of memory, he closed his eyes. There, in the wind, something whispered. Not words. Not quite. But it felt like the island was calling him back, not just to remember, but to uncover something long buried beneath waves, years, and silence. Something was waiting on Windmere. And the Len, for the first time in decades, was ready to listen. Act 2, Footprints Beneath the Pines. The wind curled around the Len's shoulders like a familiar shawl, cool and persistent. He stood on the cliff until the sun slipped westward, shadows stretching across the old footpath like faded scars of forgotten wanderers. The rhythmic crash of waves below was no longer just sound, it was a voice. And though it spoke in no language, it filled him with something ancient and real. The island hadn't changed in some places. The trees still leaned like curious elders. The path toward the lighthouse, narrow and overgrown, still bore traces of its old stones. But as he walked, the Len realized something: he had changed. He didn't move with the reckless stride of the boy in the photo. He was cautious now. Deliberate. His mind measured every sound, not out of fear, but reverence. It was as if each pine needle, each gust of salt air, might contain a memory waiting to bloom. Halfway down the path, he paused. There, nestled in the roots of a crooked cedar, was something unexpected: a glass bottle, cloudy with age. He crouched and picked it up. Inside, a roll of paper, tightly curled and stained yellow. His pulse quickened. Was this from before? Something he or one of the kids had hidden decades ago. With care, he uncorked the bottle and unrolled the note. The writing was jagged, written in blue ink that had bled with time. To whoever finds this, the key is not lost. It waits where the hawks sleep. Under stone, behind time. Come alone. The Len blinked, staring. The handwriting, it felt faintly familiar. Not his. Not his sister's. But someone from that era. His heart thudded as a memory stirred, faint and indistinct: a game, perhaps. A summer dare. Or something more. The hawks. The cliffs. A key. He looked around. The forest stretched in all directions, layered with mist and twilight. The trees whispered their secrets, and Thelen felt them pressing closer. He folded the note and slipped it into his pocket. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe just a relic of childhood games. But even as he told himself that, he knew better. There was something buried here, not just metaphorically. The island remembered him. And it had left breadcrumbs. He continued toward the lighthouse. The structure still stood tall, proud, and slightly tilting with age. Its paint had chipped, the railing rusted. But its presence was unshakable, a sentinel from another time. Thelen circled the base. He found the old bench, his favorite thinking spot, still there. Covered in lichen, barely holding itself together, but it hadn't fallen. Like so many things on Windmere. He sat, letting the wind take his thoughts. From here, he could see the cove far below, the harbor lights beginning to blink to life, the shadows of seabirds soaring against the dusk. And then a laugh. Soft, distant, unmistakably human. He turned sharply. The path behind him was empty. The trees still. But he was sure of what he'd heard. It wasn't eerie, not exactly. It was more familiar. He rose, heart pounding. Hello. He called. Silence. Then, as if in response, a single pine cone dropped behind him with a rustle. Coincidence. He chuckled nervously and shook his head. You're imagining things, Thelen. Still, he walked a little quicker on the way back. That evening, he checked into the small inn run by the Lindells, an elderly couple who remembered him instantly. Little Thelen Rowe. MRS. Lindell exclaimed. I'd recognize those eyes anywhere. You used to steal my lemon candies. He smiled. Borrowed. I always intended to return them. They laughed, and for a brief moment, the weight of the years lifted. His room overlooked the cliffs. It smelled of lavender and old books. He sat on the bed, shoes off, and stared at the bottle on the desk. The message replayed in his mind. The key is not lost. He didn't sleep well. Dreams shifted and morphed, waves crashing, a girl with braids laughing in the sunlight, a cave mouth yawning open behind a curtain of vines. A song, played on a tin whistle. A hawk's cry that became a scream. He awoke at dawn with sweat on his brow and the ghost of melody in his ears. Outside, the island waited. And in his pocket, the note whispered like a heartbeat. Act 3, where hawks once slept. The morning on Windmere arrived shrouded in pearl gray mist. The inn's windows glistened with dew, and the air held the crisp sharpness of salt and pine. The Len stood on the narrow balcony, the message still burning in his mind like a riddle half solved. Where the hawks sleep. It couldn't just be a poetic metaphor, could it? He thought back to childhood, to the games they played and the stories whispered under bed sheets. Was there ever a place they referred to like that? Then he remembered Hawk's Rest. It was what they called the ridge above the northern cliffs, where hawks once nested in high crags above the sea. He hadn't thought of it in years. It was dangerous, sharp rocks, fierce winds, and long abandoned paths. Their parents had warned them never to go there. Which, of course, made it irresistible. As the sun broke through the clouds, the Len packed a day bag, slipped the glass bottle into his coat, and set out on foot. The forest to the north was deeper than he remembered. The trees thicker. The silence louder. He took the old trail behind the chapel ruins, a trail nearly lost to brambles and moss. Every few steps, he brushed aside vines or stepped over fallen limbs. Nature had reclaimed much of it, but every so often he caught glimpses of the past initials carved into bark, a rusted lantern still dangling from a branch, a piece of blue ribbon fluttering from a thorn bush. Celia, he whispered. That had been her ribbon. Celia Ward. His closest friend on the island. The one who dared him to climb the cliff's face. The one who always brought a slingshot, a story, and a smile. She left the island the same summer he did. He hadn't spoken to her since. The ribbon fluttered again, as if waving. He pressed on. The trail ended at the base of the cliffs. The wind howled here, funneling between the jagged rocks. He craned his neck, scanning the rise. And there at the very top stood an old hawk's nest, long abandoned, perched in a crag that jutted like a broken tooth into the sky. But it wasn't the nest that caught his attention. It was the stone slab beside it. Squinting, he made out strange grooves cut into the rock face too regular to be erosion. A mark. A sign. With slow, cautious steps, the Len began to climb. The ascent wasn't easy. His hands found only sparse grips, and his boots scraped slick stone more than once. But adrenaline pulled him forward. This wasn't just curiosity now. This was purpose. By the time he reached the ridge, his breath came in sharp bursts and his knuckles were scraped raw. The slab was flat, dark, almost obsidian-like. Moss clung to its edges, and weeds grew through narrow cracks. The Len knelt and brushed it clean with his sleeve. At its center, barely visible in the morning light, was a carving, a circle with 3 intersecting lines and a crescent moon at the top. He gasped. It was the symbol they used as children. Their made-up club emblem. The Watchers of Windmere, they called themselves. It was childish nonsense then. But now it felt like prophecy. He reached into his pocket, retrieved the bottle, and unrolled the message again. Under stone, behind time. With shaking hands, he felt along the edges of the slab. there a notch? He pressed it. With a groan of ancient stone grinding against earth, a piece of the slab shifted. Dust exploded upward. The Len coughed, leaning back as a square section of the slab slowly sank, revealing a narrow hollow chamber beneath. Inside, a metal box, tarnished and worn, but unmistakably real. He pulled it free, heart thudding, fingers trembling. The box was sealed with a latch. He opened it. Inside, a bundle of old photographs, a pocket compass with a cracked glass face, and a tiny key no bigger than a thumbnail, made of some strange black metal. Taped to the inside of the lid was another note. This one was newer, maybe 10 years old. It was written in that same sharp blue ink. You remember the promise. If you've come this far, maybe you're ready to finish what we started. Windmere is not what it seems. Come find me. It was signed. C. The Len sat back, stunned. Celia was here. Or had been. And she'd left this for him. A wind passed through the ridge, carrying the scent of salt and something older like parchment, or fire long cooled. He stared out over the sea, box clutched to his chest. The island wasn't done with him. And somewhere, someone else was playing the same game. Act 4, the letter beneath the dust. The descent from Hawk's Rest was slower, heavier. Not because of the terrain the Len had found his footing among the roots and shale, but because of what he now carried. The box, the key, the letter, and a name that echoed in his chest louder than the wind in the pines. Celia. He hadn't thought about her in years, not in a real way. She was always a shape at the edge of memory, a laugh drifting across summers long past. But now she was here again, not just as a memory, but a voice calling across time. And she had left a trail. Back in his room at the inn, the Len laid the items out on the desk like artifacts unearthed from a forgotten ruin. The compass no longer worked, its needle spun in lazy circles. The photographs were black and white, edges curled with age. Most showed familiar sights, the lighthouse, the cove, the crooked cedar tree. But one photo made him stop. It showed 3 children standing in front of a half-buried stone arch. The image was slightly out of focus, but the arch was clear, overgrown, ancient, and carved with that same symbol, the circle and crescent. Behind it, only darkness. He remembered the day it was taken. They'd been playing near the base of the cliffs when they found it, a strange stone structure jutting from the hillside, like a door without a building. Celia had called it their gateway to the under-island, and they dared each other to knock on the stone, convinced it led to pirate tunnels or secret rooms filled with treasure. But then something had happened. A loud noise. A sudden shift in the earth. And Celia had screamed. They never went back after that. He'd forgotten it. Buried it. Until now. The note in the box had said, "You remember the promise." And he did. Vaguely. One summer evening, sitting under a tree, Celia had made him swear that if she ever disappeared, not just gone, but truly disappeared, he'd find her. That he'd follow the clues. He thought it was a game. Now, he wasn't so sure. The Len took the key and turned it over in his hand. Cold. Heavy. Ancient in a way that didn't match its size. He held it up to the lamplight and saw a number etched into the side. 217B. Not coordinates. Not a date. A room number. He blinked. Then reached into his bag and pulled out the town map the innkeeper had given him. Most of Windmere was too small for numbered buildings. Except the old observatory. Back when the island had more visitors, long before the mainland built its own, Windmere had a modest observatory tucked into the cliffs, half built into the rock. It was abandoned now, closed off after years of disuse and damage. He remembered sneaking there with Celia once. It had been their secret mission base. They'd drawn maps. Hidden trinkets. Left spy notes under floorboards. Could she have hidden something there? He stuffed the key and photo into his coat and made for the northern cliffs once more. The observatory loomed like a forgotten temple, its dome rusted and windows cracked. Ivy clung to its sides like green veins. The front doors had been nailed shut long ago, but the Len found a gap in the rear wall where time had carved a new entrance. Inside was dust and silence. The floorboards groaned under his weight. Furniture lay overturned. Charts and papers littered the ground, chewed at the edges by damp and time. The air was thick with mold and memory. He moved through the ruins until he found it, the door with a faded brass plaque. Room 217B. The latch was rusted, but the key slid in with eerie ease. It turned. The door opened. The room beyond was not what he expected. It was clean. Not pristine, but preserved. Like someone had been here not long ago. Dust coated the shelves, yes, but not the desk. The bed was made. A blanket folded neatly. A cup with dried tea still sat on the windowsill. And on the desk, a letter, addressed to him. His full name. The Len Rowe. With shaking hands, he opened it. If you're reading this, then you've found the key. Good. That means you're still curious. That part of you hasn't died yet. I know this feels strange. It's meant to. But I didn't just leave clues for fun, I left them because I had to. Something is happening on this island. Something deep, older than us, older than even Windmere. You've felt it too, haven't you? The doorway we found as kids wasn't just a stone arch. It was real. It's part of something hidden beneath the island. Something waiting to be opened. I've gone looking for answers. I can't explain it all here. but if you want to understand, really understand, then come to the garden. You know the one I mean. The one no map shows. I'll be waiting. See. The Len sat down slowly, the paper trembling in his hands. The garden. Of course. Their secret place. A clearing behind the waterfall, surrounded by wild bluebells and singing birds. They used to pretend it was enchanted, that time stopped there. Adults didn't know it existed. And now she was asking him to return. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the observatory's frame. The old dome creaked as if turning to face him. Somewhere far below, the waves pounded the cliffs in a steady rhythm like a heartbeat from the deep. The Len folded the letter and stood. The island was speaking louder now. And he was done pretending not to hear. Act 5, The Garden Without a Map. The Len left the observatory as dusk folded gently over the island, the letter from Celia pressed close to his chest like a second heartbeat. The silence of the abandoned structure seemed to cling to him as he walked, like fine dust, like breath held too long. His boots crunched softly against gravel as he descended the cliffside trail, each step guided more by instinct than memory. The garden. He hadn't heard that name aloud in decades. Not since they were kids. Not since that perfect, hidden clearing behind the old falls, a place no one spoke of and no one seemed to remember existed. A sanctuary they discovered together, just the two of them. Back then, it had felt like a different world, entirely full of dragonflies, tangled vines, and warm air that smelled of mint and moss. Even then, it didn't feel real. He reached the edge of the forest by twilight. Shadows slanted between the trunks like thin blades. The world here was quiet, not lifeless, but listening. Alive in a way that pulsed through branches and leaves. The deeper the Len walked, the more the forest around him began to shift. Familiar markers were gone. Paths that once led somewhere now twisted, split, vanished. But his body remembered what his mind could not. He followed the sound. It started faintly, a whisper of falling water in the distance. He pressed on, pushing through thickets, stepping over old roots and decaying logs, until the foliage thinned and suddenly, the trees opened into light. There it was. The garden. Time had not claimed it. Bluebells still shimmered in twilight hues, scattered across a glade carpeted in soft moss. The waterfall still tumbled from the cliff above, veiling the entrance to a shallow cave behind a curtain of silver. Dragonflies still danced above the surface of the pool, and the air smelled exactly as it did all those years ago, wild and clean and almost enchanted. The Len stepped into the clearing and exhaled for the first time in hours. A wooden bench, old but intact, sat near the base of the falls. Flowers climbed its legs. The initials T+C were still carved into one of its slats, faint, worn, but unmistakable. He walked to it, brushed away a fallen leaf, and sat. The quiet was perfect. But only for a moment. He noticed it, then something new. A small structure nestled at the edge of the clearing. Almost like a shed, but older, hand-built of stone and driftwood, half covered in ivy. He didn't remember it from before. He approached cautiously. The door was ajar. Inside, a single oil lantern glowed faintly, still warm. Someone had been here. On a table within, resting atop a spread of hand-drawn maps and weather journals, was another envelope. No name this time. He opened it. "You're getting close now. I don't know if you remember the cave. We always joked it would be a dragon's den. But it's real. What's inside isn't just memory, the land. It's truth. The island keeps secrets. You always felt that, didn't you? That the rocks listened. That the stars here moved, differently. I'm not gone. I'm ahead. See." His breath caught. Not gone. Ahead. He turned toward the waterfall, eyes narrowing. The cave. When they were children, it was just a dark hollow behind the water, a place to stash candy or a walkie-talkie, to tell stories with flashlights and pretend monsters slept inside. But now, something in his chest told him it had changed. He stepped to the pool, stripped off his boots, and crossed barefoot. The water was cold, but not sharp. Just enough to remind him he was alive. He pushed through the curtain of water, bracing himself, and emerged into the cave. It was deeper than he remembered. The floor sloped gently downward. The light dimmed. The air turned cooler, drier. He walked with one hand brushing the rough stone wall, following the tunnel's bend. And then the passage opened. The space inside wasn't large, but it was extraordinary. The ceiling glowed faintly with clusters of bioluminescent moss, twinkling like starlight. Crystals jutted from the stone at odd angles, refracting the light into soft rainbows that danced on the walls. And at the center, resting atop a stone pedestal, lay an object wrapped in faded cloth. He stepped forward, unwrapped it. It was a journal. Bound in leather, cracked at the spine. The first page was blank except for a single symbol drawn in gold ink. The circle. The crescent. The lines. He turned the page. The handwriting was Celia's. "If you're reading this, it means you've finally started listening. Good. You always heard the island better than anyone. It speaks, you know. Not with words but with patterns, dreams, moments that feel like déjà vu but aren't. They're real. This place, it's a threshold. Between here and something else. I'm on the other side now. Not gone. Not lost. The island opened, and I stepped through. I left this so you could follow if you're brave enough." The len froze. On the next page, a drawing. The stone arch. Below it, 3 symbols. The first was the island itself. The second, the key. The third a spiral, opening outward like a galaxy. He didn't understand. Not yet. But he knew this, he wasn't imagining things. This wasn't nostalgia. This was something deeper, something ancient that threaded through the island, through memory, through him. The cave pulsed quietly with that truth. He tucked the journal into his coat and stepped back into the waterfall's veil, heart pounding. The sky outside had turned indigo. Stars pricked through the clouds brighter than he'd ever seen. He didn't know where Celia had gone. But he knew where he had to go next. Back to the stone arch. Back to the place where the story began. And perhaps, to where it would truly begin again. Act 6, The Door in the Earth. The island did not sleep. Even beneath a blanket of stars, Windmere thrummed with energy. It wasn't the kind made by machines or city lights. It was older. Wilder. Something that stirred in the soil, hummed in the roots, and whispered through the wind. The Len felt it as he walked beneath the moonlight, boots damp from the garden's mossy paths, Celia's journal pressed tight beneath his coat. He had left the glade without hesitation, his steps guided by something stronger than memory. It was instinct now, or perhaps invitation. The stone arch waited. He remembered the way, though he hadn't seen it since he was 12. Past the northern ridge, down the fox path near the hollow log, through the fern field where dragonflies glowed in summer dusk. It was a place so deeply hidden it felt like it didn't belong entirely in the world, not then, and certainly not now. By the time he reached it, the moon had climbed high, casting silver light across the clearing. And there it stood. The arch. Half buried in earth and root, its edges cracked and worn, vines crawling over its surface like veins of ivy. Yet its shape remained clear, 2 vertical stones supporting a third, forming a perfect doorway to nothing. Or so it seemed. The Len stepped closer, breath hitching. The carvings were still there. The crescent. The circle. The spiral. But now, something had changed. The stone shimmered faintly in the moonlight, not reflection, but resonance. As if it recognized him. He reached into his coat and pulled out the journal. The pages rustled in the wind, stopping on the last marked page. You must bring 3 things, the key, the memory, and the name. Only then will it open. He had the key. The black metal thing still cold against his palm. The memory. That was with him always. The name. He spoke it aloud, as though testing its weight. Celia. Nothing happened. Then he said it again, not with lips alone, but with heart, with memory, with truth. Celia Ward. The stone groaned. The Len stepped back as the arch vibrated gently, the carvings glowing with a faint golden hue. The air grew still, no breeze, no birdsong, no rustle of trees. It was as though the island held its breath. Then, in the center of the arch where once there had been nothing, a shimmer appeared. It began as a ripple, like heat above pavement. Then it deepened, thickened, darkened, until it resembled liquid glass, swirling with colors that had no name. He stepped closer, every hair on his arms rising. Beyond the veil, shapes moved. Not threatening, not clear, but alive. A forest, but not this one. Trees that shimmered. A sky too wide. Light that pulsed like heartbeats. He looked at the key in his hand, then back to the portal. And he heard it. Her voice. The land. Soft. Certain. He didn't think. He stepped through. The first thing he felt was warmth, not physical, but emotional. Like sunlight through a closed window. The ground beneath his feet was soft, spongy, but held his weight. He opened his eyes. The world beyond the arch was breathtaking. He stood in a clearing not unlike the garden but bigger. Wilder. Trees soared hundreds of feet into the sky, their bark glowing faintly blue. Flowers shimmered with iridescent petals. Insects flitted like living lanterns. The air thrummed with music not composed, but natural. The harmony of a world breathing. The sky above wasn't black, nor blue, but a soft gradient of color that changed as he looked at it: lavender, gold, deep teal. And across the sky floated enormous white shapes like silent whales, drifting in impossible patterns. He turned and gasped. The arch was still behind him, standing alone in a small glade. But beyond it, there was no path back. The forest closed in behind the stone, dense and impenetrable. He wasn't afraid. He was home. Or, perhaps at the beginning. A movement caught his eye. Someone stood beneath a nearby tree, back to him, hands clasped behind her. She wore a dark green coat, boots dusty with travel. Her hair was longer now, tied loosely with a blue ribbon. She turned. Celia. Older. Changed. But unmistakably her. Her eyes met his wide, brimming, and then she smiled. Not a smile of surprise, but one of recognition. "You made it," she said. He walked to her slowly, disbelieving. "I thought," he began. "You were right to," she said. "But I told you I'd be ahead." He reached out, touching her shoulder as if to make sure she wouldn't vanish. She didn't. "What is this place?" he asked. She looked around, then back at him. The part of the island no one remembers. The truth beneath the earth. The world the stones dreamed of when they were still awake. She reached into her coat and pulled out a second key shaped like his, but inverted. "Are you ready?" she asked. Thelen took a breath and nodded. Act 7, The Echo Field. Thelen didn't know how long they walked. The forest around them shifted like a living painting, trees that glowed with slow pulses of blue and violet, flowers that sang soft, almost imperceptible notes when brushed. The path beneath their feet wasn't made of soil or stone, but a soft weave of glowing moss, and with each step, it felt like the ground was aware of their presence. Celia moved ahead with confidence, as if she'd walked this path 1,000 times. Thelen followed, still trying to balance awe with the flood of questions surging through his mind. "Where are we?" he asked finally, voice quiet, as though afraid to disrupt the air. She glanced back, smiling softly. "The locals called it Aradai. But that was long before we were born. Before Windmere was Windmere." "Aradai," he repeated. "Is it another world?" Her gaze flickered to the canopy above. A reflection? Or a root system? This place exists beneath, not underground, but underneath reality. Windmere was built on top of something ancient. A fracture point. A bridge. They emerged into a new clearing, vast, circular, and impossibly quiet. The trees here were spaced evenly, forming a perfect ring. At the center was a smooth, glass-like surface the size of a small lake, reflecting the sky above with eerie precision. Surrounding the pool were upright stones, 10 of them each carved with symbols older than any language Thelen had ever seen. He stepped toward the pool, mesmerized. And then it spoke. Not with a voice, but with images. The surface rippled, and a vision formed, a young Thelen and Celia, running through the woods of Windmere. They laughed, tumbled, climbed. It was a memory, a real one, unfolding as if filmed from above. He turned to her, stunned. "Is this?" Celia nodded. "This is the echo field. It shows you pieces of yourself, the ones you've forgotten, buried, or ignored. It remembers for you." As he watched, the scene changed. A different moment. The night his father left. He stood alone at the dock, fists clenched, too proud to cry. He had locked that moment away so tightly, yet here it was, mirrored perfectly. He stepped back, shaken. "It's overwhelming at first," Celia said gently, placing a hand on his shoulder. "But it helps. This place doesn't judge. It reveals. And there's more." She led him past the stones, toward a low arch of twisted wood and crystal. A doorway not unlike the first stone arch, but alive, almost breathing. Beyond it lay something that looked like a ruined city. Structures shaped from trees, stone, and starlight stretched into the horizon, not built, but grown. They passed murals etched into leaves, stairways woven from roots, and towers that shimmered as if made of memory itself. This was the old village, Celia said. They called themselves the Watchers. They were the first to find this place. Long before the mainland, long before Windmere. And they built this. Thelen whispered. No, she said. They tended it. It was already here. The island above, it's just the surface. They reached what appeared to be a central chamber, a domed structure where light from above filtered through openings shaped like constellations. Inside, on a pedestal of living wood, sat a single mirror. It was no ordinary mirror. Its surface shimmered like water, never still. And when Thelen looked into it, he didn't see his face. He saw possibilities. Versions of himself. A child who never left the island. A man who became a teacher. Another who never found a letter. Another who never forgot Celia. He recoiled slightly. What is this? He asked, voice trembling. Celia's voice was soft. It's the convergence. The place where the selves you never lived still echo. This is why I brought you here. This is why the island called you back. He stared into the mirror again, mesmerized. The arch, he said slowly. The journal. The key. The compass that spins endlessly. They're not just artifacts, Celia said. They're anchors. They keep you centered as you pass between layers. You mean, this place is real, but I'm, what, dreaming? No, she said. You're awake for the first time. They sat in silence for a while, letting the truth settle. Finally, Thelen spoke. Why me? Celia turned to him, her eyes filled with something deep: regret, love, certainty. Because you remembered. Because you came back when most people forget. Because you were the only one who ever listened. Thelen looked around the ancient village, the glowing sky, the living world around them. Are there others? He asked. She nodded. Scattered. Lost. Some never found the key. Others turned back. But there's still time. For what? Her gaze lifted toward the shimmering towers. To wake the island. Act 8, the heart that sleeps below. Night didn't fall in Aradai the way it did in the world above. Here, it folded in gently, like a curtain drawn over a lantern, allowing a soft glow to remain behind. The stars in the sky were alive, shifting patterns, humming with rhythm. Each twinkle felt deliberate, each constellation a message waiting to be read. Thelen lay on a mat of moss inside the ancient village, unable to sleep. Around him, the walls of the dome glowed faintly with the reflected memories of his day, moments replayed in shadow and light. The echo field had stirred something deep in him, and the mirror in the convergence, it hadn't just shown possibilities. It had awakened questions. Across the room, Celia sat in quiet meditation. She hadn't spoken much since they left the mirror chamber. Something in her demeanor had shifted, not distant, but focused, like someone hearing a music others could not. Thelen sat up. "You said the island needs to be awakened. What did you mean?" She opened her eyes slowly. "You felt it?" "I know you have." He nodded. "The way it hums. The way it remembers me." Celia rose and crossed the room to stand by a low wall made of crystallized bark. Beyond it, the city of Aradai shimmered like a dream. "The island," she said, "is not just land. It is consciousness. Dormant now, but not dead. The Watchers once spoke with it, learned from it, protected it. But the connection was lost. Forgotten." She turned to him. "It's sleeping, Thelen. We have to wake it or it will vanish forever." He frowned. "Vanish?" She nodded. "This place exists because belief holds it here. Memory keeps it rooted. But memory fades. Stories are forgotten. If no one remembers Aradai, it will dissolve into nothing." He looked out at the glowing trees, the breathing earth, the world that felt more alive than any he had known. "And how do we wake it?" Celia gave a small smile. "We begin at the core." The journey to the core wasn't marked by maps. There were no signs, no clear trails, only feeling. Celia moved like someone following a melody in her mind. Thelen followed close behind, trusting her certainty, even as the world around them grew stranger. The ground shifted as they moved deeper. Flora changed. Trees grew wider, leaves translucent. Some flowers hummed in harmony with their footfalls. Strange creatures flitted at the edges of vision, winged things made of mist and song, disappearing if looked at too directly. They passed through an arch of woven roots, and suddenly everything fell silent. Not in a peaceful way. In a charged way. They stood at the edge of a great circular chasm. At its center, a structure that seemed to grow straight from the earth, not built, but born. It pulsed with a dim golden glow, like a heart beneath skin. Thelen whispered, "Is that it?" Celia nodded. "The node. The point where the island breathes." A bridge of light stretched across the chasm. Celia stepped onto it without hesitation, and Thelen followed, every part of him alert. As they crossed, he noticed patterns spiraling beneath the bridge, not geometric designs, but memories. A woman weeping beside a stone. A child planting a tree. A boy and girl racing through tall grass. Some of the memories were his. When they reached the center, Celia placed both hands on the node. It responded with a deep chime, like a bell tolling underwater. A ripple passed through the world. Celia looked at him. Now it needs you. The lens stepped forward. Place your memory inside it, she said. He wasn't sure what that meant until he felt the pull. The node hummed against his skin, inviting him to offer something. He thought of the dock, that night his father left. He thought of the arch, the first time he stepped through. He thought of Celia's laugh, high and reckless, and the moment he'd almost forgotten it. He placed a hand on the node and gave. The effect was instant. Light surged from the structure, arcing upward into the sky. The chasm echoed with sound. The trees around them trembled, their leaves shimmering with new energy. Far above, the stars rearranged. Something was waking. The light pulsed outward, reaching the edge of the dream city, passing through the echo field, brushing across the convergence. The entire island Aradai and Windmere both shuddered as if exhaling for the first time in centuries. And then, from beneath the node, a voice spoke. Not in words. In understanding. You are remembered. Celia staggered back, tears in her eyes. The Len gasped. What was that? She whispered, the island, it knows you. It remembers you. The node's glow softened, as if resting after the effort. But the Len felt different now, changed. His memories no longer felt like shadows clinging to him. They felt like roots, anchoring him into something larger. Is it enough? He asked. Celia shook her head, not in sadness, but in awe. It's the beginning. From somewhere deep beneath the node, another light stirred. A new path had opened. Act 9, the route below the dream. Silence followed the awakening. Not an empty silence, but one brimming with presence, like a room just after music has ended, when the air still pulses with echoes of the final note. The node now glowed with a warm, amber pulse, and the ground beneath it thrummed with quiet energy. The Len stood beside it, breath shallow, heart beating like a drum in the void. Celia stood just behind him, her eyes closed, as if listening for something only she could hear. Then it came, a whisper not spoken aloud, but carried through the bones of the earth. The path opens. If you walk it, you will not return unchanged. Beneath the node, where once there was only smooth stone, a spiral stair had emerged, hewn not by hand, but grown from the earth, roots twisted into steps, glowing faintly like veins of starlight. The Len turned to Celia. You've never been down there, have you? She shook her head. I only knew it existed. The Watchers never wrote what they found at the bottom. Or, maybe they never came back. The stair pulsed once like an invitation. The Len nodded. Then we go together. They descended slowly, the light from above fading behind them. The spiral wound down into darkness, yet there was no fear. Only awe. The further they moved, the more the walls began to shimmer, not with carvings, but with living memory. Scenes flickered along the curved surface, generations passed, lovers planting trees, storms shaking the island's cliffs, laughter beneath summer moons. And then, the founding of Windmere. They saw the first settlers, people not from Aradai, but from the mainland, sailing to the island, unaware of what lay below. The memory trembled, shifted, and became the fracture. A moment in time when something broke. The vision showed stone split with light. Energy escaping. A watcher cloaked in white standing alone before a door etched with spirals. A mistake. A sacrifice. Then blackness. Celia reached out, steadying herself against the wall. It was sealed. Whatever they found, they tried to hide it. The Len glanced ahead. The stair ended just a few steps down. At the bottom was a door. It was massive, 10 feet high, shaped like an eye, with an iris made of swirling crystal that shifted colors like oil on water. Around it, roots pulsed faintly, as though unsure whether to hold it closed or push it open. And there, embedded in the very center of the door, a keyhole. Not just any keyhole. His keyhole. The black key from Hawk's Rest seemed to vibrate in his coat pocket, aware that it had finally come home. He turned to Celia. "This is it?" She nodded. The heart below. The source of Aradai. He approached, the key growing warm in his hand. When he inserted it, the crystal iris dilated. The door side opened, not with violence, but sorrow. Inside was not what he expected. There was no vast chamber, no glowing artifact, no treasure trove of knowledge. Just a tree. A single, enormous, ancient tree, its trunk wide as a tower, its bark blackened with time, its branches weaving through the ceiling like veins in the sky. And yet, from every limb, memories hung like fruit, glowing orbs, pulsing with light. The Len stepped forward. Celia whispered, "The root mind." She joined him as they approached. The tree seemed aware of them. Leaves rustled without wind. A low vibration filled the room, not threatening, but questioning. At its base was a pool of clear water. Reflected in the surface wasn't their own image, but the moment they first met, two children crouched over a frog in a puddle, laughing wildly. A memory the Len hadn't recalled in years. Another orb fell from the branches and hovered near his chest. It showed Celia alone, years ago, inside Aradai, reading her journal by firelight, waiting. He swallowed. "It's been showing us to ourselves." Celia nodded. The root mind stores everything. Every moment the island has ever witnessed. Then the tree spoke, not in voice, but in presence. "One of you must stay." The Len turned sharply. What? One to anchor. One to carry. Celia looked away, jaw clenched. I knew, she said. I suspected this was coming. I don't understand. She stepped forward, resting a hand on the tree's bark. This place can't stay awake unless someone stays inside it. Someone who remembers. Someone who becomes part of it. No, the Len said, stepping back. No, there has to be another way. We came to awaken it, not bury one of us in it. Celia looked at him, a bittersweet smile on her lips. But you don't understand. I was never meant to leave. I've been here longer than I should have. This place has held me. You were the one who left, the one who forgot and then chose to remember. He stared at her, shaking his head. But I just found you again. She stepped closer. Then let me give you this. Let me give you the island, and its stories, and all the things we forgot. Take them back. Make them known. Tears burned in his eyes. He touched her hand. Then promise me this isn't goodbye. She leaned in, forehead to his. Nothing remembered is ever truly gone. The light swelled. The tree opened. And the island began to breathe fully. Act 10, What the Island Remembers. The first thing the Len noticed was the wind. It wasn't the chill of Aradai, nor the living warmth of its dream-like forests. This was Windmere air, raw, salt-heavy, tinged with the scent of heather and sea. The kind of wind that carried the weight of tides, the silence of lighthouses, the quiet presence of home. He opened his eyes. He was standing in the clearing where the stone arch had first appeared, only now, it was gone. No trace of it remained. No shimmer in the air, no lingering glow. Just moss, trees, and a scattering of bluebells bending in the breeze. For a moment, he stood motionless. Then came the ache, not of physical pain, but of absence. Celia. She was gone. Or rather, she had become something else. Something woven into the roots of Aradai. Her body hadn't faded. Her presence hadn't vanished. But she was no longer beside him. She was beneath him. Around him. Everywhere the island remembered itself. He whispered her name once, not to call her, but to honor her. Then, slowly, he turned toward the path that led back to town. The walk to Windmere felt longer than before. Not because the road had changed, but because he had. Every tree he passed seemed to breathe. Every rock he stepped over pulsed with a soft memory. He saw things now, glimpses. The boy who once raced up this path. The girl who laughed and dared him to jump. The sound of summer thunder, of stolen peaches, of wind chimes in the distance. The island was not just awake. It was awake with him. As he crested the final hill, the town came into view, and that's when he realized something else had changed. The bell tower was ringing. Not in alarm. Not in mourning. But with a sound so clear, so ancient, that it stilled the waves. A resonance that echoed through the stone, through the roots, through the sky. People stood in the streets, faces turned toward the tower. And somehow, they remembered too. Not everything. Not Aradai, not the dreamlike world beneath. But something. A feeling. A presence. As though a veil had been lifted just enough to let in light. At the inn, Mrs. Lindell met him with wide eyes and a whisper, "The Cliffs were singing last night." At the harbor, old fishermen spoke of the water rising and falling in perfect rhythm with their breath. At the bookstore, a copy of a long-forgotten map had reappeared on a shelf showing paths that hadn't existed in 100 years. The Len didn't explain. He simply listened. And then, he wrote. He spent weeks recording what he could remember in journals, on scraps of paper, on napkins in the cafe by the pier. He drew the echo field, the dream mirror, the convergence chamber. He mapped the stair into the heart below and described the feeling of the root mind's presence. But most of all, he wrote about Celia. Her smile. Her courage. Her voice. Her sacrifice. He didn't know who would read it. But he knew it mattered. And every night, when the stars began to blink into existence above Windmere, he would sit by the lighthouse with the compass she left him still spinning, still restless, and whisper stories into the wind. Sometimes, the wind answered. One morning, a letter arrived at the inn. No return address. No stamps. Just his name. Inside was a page torn from a journal not his. The handwriting was hers. The stars are moving again, the Len. Thank you for carrying the memory. The next door is forming. When it opens, you'll know. He folded the letter with trembling hands. Then looked out at the sea. Later that week, he returned to Hawk's Rest. The path was overgrown, but his feet remembered it. The tree with the crooked branch still leaned over the cliff like a bowing sentinel. And where once the slab had hidden a key, something new had grown. A flower. Bright blue. Glowing softly. At its base, another bottle. Inside, a second message. She's not gone. She's in everything the island becomes. This is only the first waking. You're not alone anymore. That night, as the stars bloomed across the sky and the sea held its breath once more, the Len dreamed. But it was no ordinary dream. He stood in Aradai again, not the one beneath Windmere, but one deeper still, filled with towers of memory, rivers of song, and voices not yet born. Celia stood at the edge of the world, holding a key made of light. She smiled. "You came back once," she said. "You'll come again." He reached for her. And the stars whispered his name. Act 11, The Ones Who Begin to Remember. Miles away from Windermere, in a cramped London flat overlooking rain-slicked rooftops, Lyra Quinn awoke gasping. The dream had returned vivid, tangled, and impossibly real. She had stood in a glowing forest, where trees whispered her name and rivers hummed with a tune she had never heard but somehow knew. A boy stood beside her, though she'd never seen his face. And in the center of it all, a tree the size of a cathedral, its branches holding stars like fruit, and a door pulsing with blue light. When she touched it, it had said, "You have been chosen to remember." She sat up, heart pounding, the words echoing long after the vision faded. This had happened 3 nights in a row. She wasn't the kind of woman who believed in fate, or destiny, or magical islands in her dreams. She was a cartographer, grounded in detail and reality, lines and legends and measured distances. She spent her life mapping places she could touch. So why had she started dreaming of a place she couldn't find on any map? She rose, stumbled to her cluttered desk, and pulled out the same worn notebook she'd scrawled in the night before. At the top of the page, circled twice in heavy ink, Aradai. Below it, rough sketches of symbols she didn't recognize: spirals, crescents, strange branching lines that felt like memory more than invention. The night before, she'd traced them from somewhere. Not from a book, not from a reference. From the inside of her mind. That morning, Lyra called in sick for the first time in 5 years. 3 days later, she arrived at Windermere. The ferry rocked gently as it pulled into the harbor. Lyra stood on deck with a knotted scarf, the wind tangling her curls, her journal clutched under one arm. She hadn't known where to go, only that this was the place the dreams kept pointing to. She'd found it in an old sea chart, tucked in the corner of the British Library's archive, a hand-drawn note in fading ink beside Windermere's coastline. Here the roots breathed. That had been enough. The town seemed quiet, older than she expected. Weather-worn but not forgotten. As if it too was holding its breath. She checked into a small room above the cafe. The innkeeper stared at her a moment longer than expected before handing over the key. People don't usually come here this time of year. Lyra smiled awkwardly. I'm not most people. Meanwhile, the Len stood at the edge of the southern cliffs, watching the tide pull away. The days since the awakening had passed with both clarity and a strange, creeping tension, like something vast was shifting beneath everything. People had started acting differently. Not in obvious ways. But they paused longer at doorways. They tilted their heads at winds with no sound. Children drew spiral shapes in the sand without knowing why. And now, he felt something new. Like the beginning of a storm. That night, as stars formed above Windermere in their impossible constellations, Lyra sat at her window and traced a pattern on her wrist with trembling fingers. The same shape from her dreams. A spiral inside a circle. A crescent at its peak. She didn't know what it meant, only that something inside her had begun to wake. And somewhere in the woods outside town, the earth stirred. The next morning, they met. Thelen was leaving the bookshop when Lyra bumped into him, quite literally, on the cobbled street. "I'm so sorry," she said, catching her journal before it fell. Thelen smiled politely, then froze. The cover of her notebook bore the symbol. His heart lurched. "Where did you get that?" She looked at him, startled. "You know it?" "I've seen it," he said. "I've been there." "To where?" He hesitated, then said it, quiet as breath. "Aradai." Her eyes widened. She stepped back. "You just said it, the word. I thought I made it up. I've been dreaming it. I've drawn it." Thelen stared. "Come with me," he said. They walked for hours. He showed her the grove where the stone arch had once stood. Told her what lay beneath it. About Celia. About the awakening. About the dream world that wasn't a dream. She didn't question it. Not once. Because every word he said matched what she had seen in her sleep. "I think you're being called to," Thelen said. Lyra stood quietly at the edge of the grove. "But why?" He shook his head. "Maybe because you remember. Even if you don't know why yet." She opened her journal, flipping to a sketch she hadn't looked at since the ferry. It was the tree again. The same as in Thelen's story. Beneath it, a line she'd written in her sleep. "The second door opens where two dreamers meet." She looked up at him, eyes wide. And at that moment, a breeze passed through the clearing, not cold, not natural, and in its wake, something shimmered. A new stone arch. Just behind the trees. Just for them. Act 12, The Second Waking. The arch shimmered like heat rising from sunlit stone, rippling against the trees around it. Unlike the first, this one wasn't ancient stone cloaked in moss. It was new, alive. Its form was made of intertwined roots and crystal, pulsing gently with a color that couldn't be named, like the edge of a dream at sunrise. Thelen and Lyra stood before it, hearts pounding in perfect sync, though they had only met the day before. "What happens if we step through?" she asked, her voice just above a whisper. "I don't know," Thelen said, "but I think we're supposed to." He reached out. Lyra mirrored him. Together, their hands passed through the shimmering veil. And then they stepped forward. The transition wasn't instant. It was a descent, not of distance, but of layers. Like sinking through memories too thick to float, through lullabies once forgotten, through pages torn from an ancient book now being slowly rewritten. For a heartbeat, they weren't people, but impressions, moments swirling in the current of something larger. And then, they arrived. Aradai, yes, but not as the Len remembered it. This was a deeper realm. The sky above was not sky, but a dome of swirling star branches, like the canopy of a galactic forest. The trees were impossibly tall, leaves like sheets of translucent pearl. The ground beneath them pulsed with a heartbeat, as though they stood on the skin of some massive, dreaming creature. This was the underbow, the oldest part of Aradai. The Len looked around, breath caught. This is new. Even to me. Lyra knelt and touched the soil. It glowed softly beneath her fingers. I've drawn this before. This exact place. A soft tone filled the air, not a sound, but a presence. Then a voice. You are the second waking. It came not from above or behind, but from within. A voice carried through bone, blood, memory. The Len staggered. Who are you? The answer came as images. Celia beneath the root mind, eyes closed, hands outstretched, now part of the very memory tree. The Len walking through the first door, carrying the echo of the past. Lyra, reaching toward stars before she was born, her mind brushed by something older than language. And then, something new. A vision of 9 arches, only 2 lit. 7 still dark. The waking is a pattern, the voice said. The first recalled the past. The second begins to reveal the forgotten truths. The third will open the memory of what is yet to come. They moved forward together, deeper into the underbow. The forest here wasn't just alive, it was aware. Trees leaned slightly as they passed. Glowing orbs drifted above the path, lighting their way. Beneath their feet, the ground shifted like it chose where they should step. Then they saw it. A structure. Not built, sung into being. It rose from the earth like the inside of a great instrument, arches and spirals of living crystal, branches wound like a cathedral grown over millennia. The walls shimmered with names. Some in languages they didn't know. Some in alphabets that had not yet been invented. One name glowed brighter than the rest. Celia Ward. Another flickered beneath it. The Len wrote. And then one more. New. Lyra Quinn. The voice returned. To awaken the next, you must remember not just what was lost, but what was hidden. Suddenly, the walls around them trembled. From deep within the structure, something stirred. Lyra gasped, gripping the Len's arm. There's someone else here. They moved into the chamber's center, where a pool of mirrored liquid pulsed like a second heart. Its surface reflected not their faces but memories they had never lived. Lyra standing on Windmere as a child, though she'd never been there before. The Len at age 5, placing his hand on a tree that had not existed yet. A group of 9 figures, each holding keys of different shapes, standing in a circle under the stars. "This is prophecy," Lyra whispered. "No," the Len said slowly. "It's inheritance." "The first waking reconnected the island to its past," the voice said. "The second reveals the chain. The story was never about one person. It was about the many who remember." The ground shook slightly. Then silence. Then a deep hum. From within the pool, a new arch began to rise. Its frame was different, still woven of light and shadow, its surface rippling with questions. It gave no warmth, no invitation, only choice. A pedestal emerged beside it. On it, a third key. But it had 2 notches. One for the Len. One for Lyra. Together, they stepped forward. Act 13, the dream that refused to die. The third arch pulsed with silence. Unlike the others, it made no sound, no beckoning hum. Its frame, woven of light and shadow, shimmered with hesitation, like the doorway itself didn't know if it should be crossed. It waited, expectant yet uncertain, holding within it a place that wasn't just hidden. It was forbidden. The Len stood before it, the dual-notched key trembling in his palm. Beside him, Lyra watched the light dance across its surface, her breath shallow. "This one feels different," she whispered. The Len nodded. "It's like the island isn't just remembering anymore. It's asking a question." They inserted the key together. A soft click. A flicker. And the arch opened. The shift was violent. Not in motion, but in perception. 1 second, they stood in Aradai's underbow, its ancient trees, its breathing sky. The next, everything bent inward, folding like a dream collapsing onto itself. And then they were falling not downward, but inward, like diving into a thought never fully formed. When they landed, it was silent. They stood on a smooth black plain that stretched in every direction, not water, not stone, but something in between. The sky above was a tapestry of broken stars, jagged and moving like shattered mirrors. They weren't in Aradai anymore. They were in the threshold between worlds. A place that existed between choices, between what was and what could have been. The Len took a step, and the ground beneath him shimmered. A memory played out at his feet. Him at 16, walking away from Windmere forever. The island fading in the rearview mirror. Lyra followed, and a memory sparked beside her. Her as a child, standing before a map she hadn't drawn yet, tears in her eyes, whispering to someone who wasn't there. "These are versions," she said softly. "Possibilities," the Len added. "Or regrets." Then the voice returned deeper, older than before. The third waking is the most dangerous. It shows not what you remembered, but what you refuse to remember. All around them, forms began to flicker into view, not ghosts, but echoes. A woman with silver eyes tending a garden of ash. A man with 7 keys standing at a door that never opened. A child screaming into a well that absorbed every sound. And then, a figure familiar and impossible. Celia. But not as Thelen remembered her. This Celia was older. Tired. Hollow-eyed. She looked at them through them. "You're not supposed to be here yet," she said. Her voice was soft, but edged with static. Thelen stepped forward. "Celia. Is it really you?" She shook her head. "A version of me. The one who failed to become the island. Who tried to hold the memory alone, and was forgotten." Lyra clutched Thelen's arm. "Is this a warning?" Celia's form flickered. "This is a choice. Every waking brings the risk of becoming a memory no one keeps. Of anchoring yourself to a truth no one wants to hear. If you go further, you may never come back as you were." They stood in silence. Then Thelen whispered, "But if we don't, this place fades again, doesn't it?" Celia gave a slow, sad nod. "Yes. And this time, it may not dream again." She held out her hand. Between her fingers, a 4th key. But this one was made not of metal or wood, it was made of memory itself, swirling with bits of their lives, their doubts, their moments of clarity and confusion. "You must take it," she said. "Not for yourselves but for the next dreamers. The ones who will need the 4th waking to remember what Aradai truly is." Thelen reached for it. The moment his fingers closed around the key, the world cracked. The stars above shattered. The sky bent inward. They were yanked upward, backward, forward, not traveling, but being rewritten. And when they landed again, they were standing in Windmere. But the town was wrong. The cobblestone streets were overgrown. The lighthouse burned with a violet flame. The sea crashed upward, defying gravity. Shops were empty, windows blown inward, and above it all, a constant hum like the island was trying to wake itself but couldn't. Lyra clutched Thelen's hand. "Is this the future?" He shook his head. "No. This is what happens if the island forgets itself completely. A collapsed timeline. A world without Aradai. Without memory. Without meaning." The 4th key glowed between them, its light the only stable thing. And then, a voice neither of them knew. "You carry the last echo. The waking cannot continue without the others." A figure stepped from the shadows. a girl no older than 16 with silver hair and dark eyes, holding a map made of stars. She looked at them and said, "It's time to find the third dreamer." Act 14, The Third Dreamer. The air in Windmere tasted like dust and salt, the ocean's voice more erratic than Thelen remembered. The town stood in eerie stillness, yet the undercurrent of movement was undeniable. The streets twisted, the buildings leaned at strange angles, as though the town had shifted out of sync with the natural flow of time. Lyra squeezed Thelen's hand tighter, her gaze flicking between the decaying shops and the violet-lit lighthouse that now pulsed with an unnatural glow. "This is not the Windmere I came here for." He nodded slowly, staring at the town that felt both familiar and completely foreign. "It's what happens when the island's memory fades," he murmured. "The timelines break apart. Things start to unravel." They turned as the voice spoke again, a whisper at first, then becoming clearer as a young woman stepped from the shadow of an abandoned bookstore. She was just a child no older than 16 with silver hair and eyes as dark as the depths of the sea. She wore a simple cloak, but the map she held in her hands was anything but simple. It shimmered, its lines made of stars that seemed to shift with every glance, showing places Thelen didn't recognize and paths that didn't exist on any map he had ever seen. Lyra blinked, confusion crossing her features. "Who are you?" The girl smiled slightly, but her eyes held a knowing sadness. "I am the one you've been seeking," she replied in a soft voice that still carried the weight of 1,000 ages. "I am the third dreamer." Thelen's heart skipped a beat. "The third dreamer?" "Yes," she said, her voice steady but filled with an ancient weariness. "I am the one who holds the final key to awaken the island fully. Without me, Aradai will remain fractured, a dream, never fully realized." Thelen stepped forward, curiosity driving him. "What do you mean? What is your role in all this?" The girl's eyes darkened as she glanced at the town around them. "I was born here, in Windmere, but I am not of this time. I have lived countless lifetimes, remembering and forgetting, just as you have. I was chosen by the island to bridge the gap, to gather the lost echoes and bring the pieces of Aradai back together." Lyra stepped closer, now fully engrossed. "So you're saying you've been waiting for us?" The third dreamer nodded solemnly. "I knew you would come. The island has called. It has already begun to remember, but without all the dreamers, it cannot return to its full potential. The fourth waking will begin with the opening of the last door, but it requires all of us to complete it." Thelen looked at her in awe. "All of us? But there's only you, Lyra, and me." The girl shook her head. "The waking is never done with just 3. The first dreamers sacrificed themselves to anchor the island's memory. The second dreamer awoke the island's heart. The third must hold the connection to the future, and the fourth—" Her voice trailed off, and she stepped toward them, handing Lyra the starry map. This map will lead us to the place where the final door rests. It's hidden deep in the ruins of Windmere, beneath the lighthouse, where the boundary between worlds is thinnest. They moved as one through the town, following the strange map that shimmered with light, each step heavier than the last. With each turn, the town seemed to grow more unstable, as if the world itself was struggling to keep hold of reality. The map guided them to the old lighthouse, now strangely distorted. It stood taller than it should have, its base surrounded by thick vines that appeared to be shifting, almost sentient. The violet glow from the lighthouse intensified as they neared, filling the air with an otherworldly hum. "We need to go inside," the third dreamer said, her voice like a faint echo. The lighthouse was built atop the place where the dreams began. "Below, we'll find the fifth key, the one that will unite the timelines and allow us to access the final door." Lyra looked at the crumbling structure, doubt in her eyes. "Are you sure? This place feels wrong." The third dreamer turned to face her, her expression unreadable. "It feels wrong because the island is no longer whole. The fifth key is what will restore balance. But it requires a choice." The Len stepped forward, determination in his eyes. "What kind of choice?" The third dreamer met his gaze. "The key will only open when one of you decides to either stay and anchor the dream of Windmere, or to leave it behind forever." Lyra looked at him, confusion crossing her face. "What do you mean by anchor it?" "The island's memory," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "The island needs a dreamer who will hold it together. The one who chooses to anchor it will remain here, tied to the island forever. The other will be free to leave." The Len felt his heart race. He turned to Lyra, his voice barely a whisper. "We can't both stay, can we?" She looked back at him, her eyes filled with the same uncertainty. "I don't know." Inside the lighthouse, they found a chamber that the map had led them to. The walls were covered in ancient symbols, glowing faintly in the darkness. At the center of the room stood an altar, and upon it, the fifth key, a crystalline shard that pulsed with the same violet light that filled the lighthouse. The third dreamer stood before the altar, her eyes scanning the symbols. "The final choice lies here," she said softly. "You must decide before the key is claimed." The Len stepped forward, hand trembling. "What if we both take the key?" The third dreamer's eyes flickered with something resembling sorrow. "If you both take the key, you will both become part of the dream. Neither of you will leave. The island will never fully awaken, and Windmere will fade into the past." Lyra stepped forward, her face pale. "So we must decide, then. Stay and anchor this place, or let it go." The Len looked at the crystal shard. "What happens if we let it go?" The third dreamer smiled faintly. "The island will rest again, as it once did. Forgotten. But those who have dreamed it will never truly forget." Act 15, The Choice That Echoes. The air inside the lighthouse was heavy. The violet glow from the fifth key pulsed in rhythm with the heartbeat of the island, casting shifting shadows across the walls, creating an eerie stillness that hung like a suspended breath. Thelen and Lyra stood before the altar, facing the key, its surface shimmering, almost calling them. The third dreamer stood quietly beside them, her gaze unwavering, as if waiting for them to decide what to do. "You must choose now," she said, her voice soft but firm. "The fifth key will either restore balance to the island and bring back what has been lost, or it will vanish once more into the ether. And once that happens, there will be no turning back." Thelen's mind raced. He had known this moment was coming, but facing it was a different matter entirely. To stay, meant to anchor the island's memory, to become part of it, a keeper of its secrets, its dreams. To leave, meant to release the island, to let it fall back into the silence of forgotten places. But he wasn't just deciding for himself. He turned to Lyra, who had been silent for the last few moments. Her face was pale, her eyes filled with a quiet sorrow. "You don't have to make this choice alone," she said, her voice steady, though there was a tremor beneath it. "Whatever you decide, I'll be with you." Thelen looked at her, his heart heavy. He had come to Windmere seeking answers, but never in his wildest dreams had he imagined this, the weight of the island's memory resting on their shoulders. "I can't decide for both of us," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I know I can't leave this place without knowing what happens if we let it go." Lyra took a step closer, her eyes meeting his. "Neither can I." The third dreamer remained silent, watching them closely, as though she had already seen countless others stand in this very spot, grappling with the same decision. "You are both dreamers," she said softly, "but you are not bound by the same fate. The island calls to you, but only you can decide whether to stay and protect it, or to let it find its own place in the cycle of time." Thelen took a deep breath, turning his gaze back to the fifth key. The crystal shard in front of him seemed to hum with energy, a force he could feel deep in his chest. It was a part of the island, a part of its heart. He stepped forward, his hand trembling as he reached for the key. Lyra's hand caught his before he could touch it. "Thelen, wait," she said urgently. "We don't have to do this." He looked into her eyes, and for the first time, he saw the same uncertainty mirrored there. She wasn't just afraid of the choice. She was afraid of what they might become. "What if we choose wrong?" she asked. "What if we both stay and we lose everything else?" Thelen didn't answer right away. The weight of her words sank into him, and for a moment, he could feel the pull of two worlds. The one they had always known and the one that had just begun to awaken. "I don't know if we can both stay," Thelen said finally. "But I know that if we don't, this island will disappear. The memories of it will fade, and the people who still hold it will forget." Lyra stood still, as though considering his words, as if she could hear the island itself calling them to make their choice. She placed her hand on the key, right next to his. "I want to remember, Thelen," she said softly. "I want to stay, but only if it means the island will live. Not just survive, but live." Thelen nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "I want that too." For a long moment, they both stood there, staring at the fifth key as though it held the answers to everything they had ever feared and dreamed of. And then, without another word, they together reached forward and grasped the key. The instant their fingers made contact with the crystal shard, the room seemed to dissolve into light. They were no longer in the lighthouse. They were standing in Aradai, in the heart of the dream world. But this wasn't the place they had visited before. This was something different, more vast, more alive. The air hummed with the energy of memories long forgotten. The trees surrounding them were no longer just trees, but witnesses, holders of ancient wisdom, of stories that stretched back through time. The stars above were brighter, each one a point of origin, a beginning. And beneath their feet, the earth seemed to pulse with life, not in a way that was natural, but in a way that was primal. The third dreamer appeared beside them once again, her expression now more solemn. "The choice has been made," she said quietly. "But there is one thing you must understand: once the island is reawakened, you will be bound to it. The memories you carry will be interwoven with this land." Thelen's heart raced. "We're not just anchoring the island, are we?" The third dreamer shook her head. "No. You are becoming it." She stepped back, allowing them to see the horizon. Far in the distance, towering above the trees, stood the fifth door, a massive gate made of woven light, etched with the same symbols they had seen in their dreams. "The final door," she whispered, "will open only when you stand together. This is the moment that will seal the fate of Aradai and Windmere." Act 16, The Fifth Door. The moment Thelen and Lyra touched the fifth key, the world around them seemed to collapse and reform all at once. The ground beneath their feet rippled like water disturbed by an unseen current, and the air thickened, pulling them forward with a force they couldn't resist. They were no longer standing in the lighthouse. They weren't even in Windmere. They were in Aradai, but not the Aradai they had known. The landscape around them was vast and unrecognizable, an ocean of shifting memories, interspersed with glowing threads of light, like veins of pure consciousness weaving through the earth. The trees stood tall, their bark shimmering with the wisdom of the ages. The stars above no longer hung in place, they moved in patterns, shifting as if each star was a story waiting to be told. And before them, standing like an ancient sentinel, was the fifth door. It was enormous, its frame made of woven light and shadow, the space between the strands filled with echoes of 1,000 dreams. It hummed with a quiet energy, as if it was waiting for them for their decision. Lyra's hand tightened around Thelen's, the key between them vibrating with the same energy. "This is it, isn't it?" she whispered, her voice carrying the weight of the moment. "This is where it all begins," Thelen said, his heart pounding. "Once we step through, we will be bound to this place. To Aradai." to the island's memory. He turned to look at her. Her face was calm, but there was an undeniable sadness in her eyes. This was the moment they had been preparing for, the moment they had chosen. Lyra nodded. We are part of this now. Forever. Thelen didn't speak. He didn't have to. They both understood the gravity of what was about to happen. The fifth door wasn't just a way forward. It was a choice that would intertwine their lives with the island's fate forever. Together, they stepped forward. As they crossed the threshold of the fifth door, the world around them seemed to dissolve into pure light. They could feel their minds expanding, their senses reaching out into the very fabric of existence. For a moment, they were everywhere and nowhere, drifting between past, present, and future. Then, suddenly, the light dimmed, and they found themselves standing on solid ground once again. But this was not the Windmere they knew. This wasn't even the Aradai they had imagined. They were standing in a vast, circular chamber. The walls were made of living roots, pulsing with a golden glow. At the center of the room stood a massive tree. Its trunk was made of crystal, its branches reaching up to the ceiling, where the stars themselves seemed to dance. The tree wasn't just a tree. It was the heart of Aradai, the very soul of the island. Lyra stepped forward, awe in her eyes. It's beautiful. Thelen nodded, his breath catching in his throat. It's more than that. This is the place where everything begins. The root of all memory. The tree seemed to sense their presence. Its crystal branches shifted, casting shadows across the floor that danced like fleeting thoughts. The ground beneath their feet trembled as the tree spoke, not in words, but in pure feeling, a deep, resonant hum that echoed in their bones. Welcome, dreamers, the island's voice said, though it wasn't spoken aloud. It was felt, understood, and experienced. You have awakened the last door, and with it, the final memory. Thelen looked up at the branches, his heart racing. What do you mean? What is the final memory? The island's voice resonated deeper this time, filling the chamber. The memory of what never was. The story of the island that was never forgotten. The truth behind what was sealed away. Lyra stepped closer to the tree, her eyes wide. What do we have to do? You must complete the cycle, the island said. To truly awaken Aradai, you must bind the forgotten to the present. One dreamer will stay to anchor the memory. The other will return to the world above, with the island's story. Thelen turned to Lyra, his heart heavy. This is the choice, isn't it? Lyra nodded slowly, her face reflecting the same uncertainty that had gripped him since they entered this place. Yes, she whispered. We both have to choose. To give up part of ourselves. The tree pulsed again, a slow rhythm like a heartbeat. The air grew thick with the weight of the decision. The fifth key you carry is not just an artifact, the island's voice continued. It is the last fragment of a truth that must be passed on. You must choose who will stay and who will leave. The Len's chest tightened. And what happens if we don't choose? Then Aradai will slip into silence again. The memory will fade. The island will be forgotten. The words hit him like a physical blow. He looked at Lyra, who was already looking back at him, her expression unreadable. The decision. The weight of it was unbearable. The Len took a step back, his hand tightening around the fifth key. This was it. The moment of truth. If they chose wrong, if they hesitated too long, everything they had done would be for nothing. I can't ask you to stay, the Len said, his voice hoarse. You have a life outside this place, Lyra. You have a future. Lyra shook her head, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. And you think I don't want to stay here? To be a part of this? She gestured around them, her hand sweeping toward the pulsing tree. But we can't both stay, the Len. You know that. The Len took a deep breath. I'll go. I'll carry the story of Aradai with me. I'll make sure it's remembered. Lyra looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. Then I'll stay. I'll anchor the island's memory. The moment they made their decision, the tree shifted. The crystal branches glowed brighter, and a golden light poured out from the trunk, enveloping the Len and Lyra. The Len felt the weight of two worlds pulling at him, one bound to the island, the other to the world above. As the light surrounded him, he looked at Lyra one last time. I'll never forget you, he whispered. Lyra smiled softly, her voice barely a whisper. And I'll never forget you, either. And then, everything changed. The Len found himself standing outside, back in Windmere, the lighthouse now dimming in the distance. The island's voice still echoed in his mind, a quiet hum of memories and stories that would never fade. But something inside him had shifted. He wasn't just a part of Aradai anymore. He carried it with him. Act 17, The Return of the Dream. The air in Windmere felt different. It was subtle at first, a lingering hum in the wind, a shift in the sea's rhythm, an odd flicker of light across the cliffs. But the Len knew something had changed. The weight of Aradai's memories pressed against him, an unshakable presence inside his chest, a soft, constant pulse. He hadn't expected it to feel like this. He had stepped through the fifth door, leaving Lyra behind, her face still etched in his mind as the light surrounded her, anchoring her to the island. He had promised to carry the story, to make sure that Aradai wouldn't fade into nothingness. But the island was still here, inside him, a piece of it carried back to Windmere. As he walked through the streets, he noticed small things, changes that no one else seemed to feel. The old street vendors seemed to have more hope in their eyes. Children in the square played in circles, drawing spirals in the dirt, as if they remembered something they couldn't name. The lighthouse, once dormant and forgotten, now shone brighter than it ever had before, its light more steady, more purposeful. Was this the island's doing? Was it waking up again, piece by piece? The Len sat on the steps of the cafe by the harbor, watching the waves crash softly against the shore, carrying something he couldn't quite grasp. The island had spoken to him in ways it never had before. The dream wasn't just a dream anymore, it was real. He pulled out the small journal he had started writing in, a habit he had adopted since that first day he arrived. The words, now more meaningful than ever, flowed onto the pages. He wrote about the tree, about the island's heart, about the fifth key that had bound him to Aradai. He paused, staring at the page. The words blurred for a moment. The Len's heart skipped a beat as a figure appeared in the distance. A shadow moving against the light, walking toward him with a purposeful stride. He blinked, his pen hovering above the page. The figure stepped into view. It was Lyra. For a moment, he thought his mind was playing tricks on him, that the memories of Aradai were bleeding into reality. But no. It was her, standing before him, just as if no time had passed at all. She smiled gently. Did you think I would be left behind? The Len stood up, shaking his head, heart pounding. I thought you'd be anchored there, in Aradai. Lyra stepped closer, her expression calm but filled with something deeper, something eternal. I was. But you didn't just leave the island behind, the Len. You carried me with you. And so, the island carried me too. The Len's breath caught. But how? You were, he trailed off, the weight of his own confusion hanging in the air. The island never truly separates us, Lyra said softly, taking his hand. Not really. The memory is always there. I may not be in Aradai anymore, but I carry it here in my heart, in my soul. And so do you. She glanced around at the town, the place that had once been so foreign to her. It's waking up, isn't it? The Len nodded, still trying to wrap his mind around what was happening. Yes. The island is returning. And it's reaching out to everyone. The memories are coming back, slowly but surely. Lyra looked at him, her eyes searching his. But what happens now? In the weeks that followed, the change in Windmere was undeniable. The villagers, who once had no connection to the island's deeper magic, began to remember. Old stories were shared in whispers. Children drew spirals and crescent moons on every available surface, and the air seemed charged with a subtle but undeniable energy. Windmere was becoming more connected to the land, to Aradai. But there was something more. At the harbor, fishermen had begun to catch strange, luminous fish creatures they'd never seen before. The trees along the cliffs began to hum faintly, as though the very earth itself was alive and breathing. The town's heart was connected to something older, something that had never truly been lost. Thelen and Lyra spent their days walking through the streets, meeting with the people who were beginning to recall the ancient dreams. And yet, they couldn't shake the feeling that there was still much to be discovered, that the true awakening was only just beginning. One night, while sitting together by the firelight in the cafe, Lyra turned to Thelen. "There's something I've been meaning to ask." Thelen looked at her, raising an eyebrow. "What is it?" She hesitated, as though choosing her words carefully. Do you think the island will ever be fully awake? Will it ever become what it was meant to be?" Thelen stared into the flickering flames for a moment, thinking. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I think that's the point. Aradai is alive in a way we'll never fully understand. It's not about being fully awake. It's about always remembering. Always dreaming. And carrying that memory forward." Lyra smiled, and for the first time in a long time, she seemed at peace. "I think I can live with that." Days turned into weeks, and the change in Windmere was undeniable. More and more people began to speak of dreams they didn't remember having, of strange memories that felt like they belonged to someone else. Even the harbor seemed to pulse with energy, the waves crashing in a way that spoke of something ancient. And then, one evening, a traveler arrived in Windmere. An old woman with silver hair and eyes as bright as the stars, she stepped off the ferry and walked straight into the heart of the town. No one knew her, but she seemed to know everything about them. She approached Thelen and Lyra, and they felt a strange pull, like the island was speaking through her. "I've been waiting for you," the woman said, her voice low and filled with ancient wisdom. "The island has remembered, but there are still many stories left to tell." Thelen and Lyra exchanged a glance. This was only the beginning. Act 18, The Arrival of the Seeker. Windmere had never been more alive. The town had changed. Not in the way people usually thought of change, but in the way things became, like the island had gently shaken off a layer of dust, revealing its true face beneath. The air hummed with the quiet resonance of a world that was remembering itself. Thelen and Lyra walked the streets more often now, meeting people who had begun to recall fragments of forgotten memories. Children drew circles in the dirt, unaware of their significance. Fishermen pulled up strange, glowing creatures from the sea, their eyes wide with wonder. Every evening, the lighthouse flickered with an otherworldly light, casting beams across the water like a guiding hand reaching for something beyond the horizon. But as the island's memory awakened, so too did something else. It was late afternoon when the stranger arrived. A figure appeared at the edge of town, stepping from the woods beyond the cliffs. She was tall, her silver hair braided in intricate patterns, and her eyes were dark like the depths of the ocean. She moved with a quiet grace, her gaze sweeping over the village with the familiarity of someone who had been here before, even though no one had ever seen her. She was carrying a staff, carved with symbols Thelen did not recognize, and her clothing was a mix of simple cloth and intricately woven patterns that suggested she was more than just a traveler. As she approached the heart of Windmere, her presence seemed to stir the air. The villagers looked up, drawn to her with a mixture of curiosity and reverence. The innkeeper paused in his work, watching her intently. Thelen and Lyra, who had been walking nearby, stopped when they saw her. Something about her was different, powerful, almost ancient. She was not a stranger to this place. The woman's gaze fell upon them, and she smiled, as though recognizing them immediately. "You've both been waiting," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen too much. "You are the dreamers, yes." Thelen stepped forward, his hand instinctively reaching for the key he still carried. "Who are you?" "I am called Selenia," she replied. "I have come because the island has called me. And now, it is time for you to hear the full story." Lyra's eyes narrowed slightly. "What do you mean, the full story?" Selenia stepped closer, her eyes gleaming with a light that seemed both distant and ancient. "The island has only revealed parts of itself to you. It is not whole. There is still a piece of its memory that is lost, and it must be found before it can truly wake." Thelen felt a pang of unease. "What part? And why haven't we heard of it before?" "The island speaks in layers," Selenia said, her gaze drifting toward the cliffs where the sea met the sky. "The first layer is memory. The second, awakening. But the third is truth. The truth of why the island sleeps, and why it must not wake completely, unless it is ready." Lyra stepped forward, her voice steady but tinged with suspicion. "And why hasn't the island been ready?" Selenia turned toward her, her face softening. "Because it has been broken. It was never meant to be whole again, but the dreamers like you have made it so. And now, you must finish what was started." Thelen looked at Lyra. They had both been carrying the memories of Aradai, its heartbeat inside their chests. The weight of what Selenia was saying settled over them like a fog. "But what does that mean for us?" Thelen asked. "We've already made our choices. We've already awakened the island." "Yes," Selenia said, her voice somber. "But the island is not just a place. It is a bridge between worlds, between dreams and reality, between life and death. It has been torn, fractured, and only the dreamers can stitch it back together. You have done part of the work, but the final piece, the one that will keep the island from fading forever, is still hidden." Lyra looked at Thelen, her hand resting lightly on the key he held. "What do we need to do?" Selenia's expression grew darker. "There is a place beneath Windmere. A chamber that lies at the heart of the island, beneath the roots of the ancient trees. It holds the truth of Aradai's origin. But to enter, you must be prepared. The chamber is not just a passage, it is a test. Only those who are truly ready to face the island's past will be able to walk through." That night, as the moon rose high above Windmere, Thelen, and Lyra sat outside, their thoughts heavy with the weight of the task before them. The village seemed peaceful, but a storm was building not in the sky, but in the air around them. The island was waking. And with its awakening came truth. They had made their choices, but now they were standing at the edge of something far deeper than they had ever imagined. The fifth key had opened the doors, but now it was time for them to understand what lay beyond them. "I can feel it," Lyra said quietly, her voice breaking the silence. "This place, it's more than a dream. It's real." Thelen nodded. "And the truth, it seems, is more than we're ready for." The next day, Selenia led them down a narrow path that wound through the dense woods. The air here was thick with memory, the scent of the earth, the rustle of the leaves, the whisper of the island's voice, barely audible. At the base of the cliffs, where the ocean met the rocks, they found the entrance. It was a door carved into the very rock, hidden by vines and ivy. The symbols on the door matched those Selenia had shown them, and as she touched it, the stone seemed to hum, responding to her touch. "This is it," she said. "The Chamber of Truth." Thelen felt a chill run down his spine. This was the place where everything would be revealed, the final piece. Act 19, The Chamber of Truth. The air around the hidden door was thick with anticipation, almost as if the earth itself was holding its breath. The path that led them here had been long, winding through the dense forest, guided only by the strange map Lyra had carried, a map that, now more than ever, seemed to have a life of its own. Thelen stood in front of the door, his hand resting on the cool stone, feeling the faint pulse of something ancient beneath the surface. The symbols on the door glowed softly, resonating with a quiet hum that seemed to echo through the earth itself. Selenia stepped forward, her eyes never leaving the door. "This is it. The truth of Aradai lies beyond this threshold. What you find inside will change everything you know." Lyra glanced at Thelen, her face a mixture of resolve and uncertainty. "Are we ready for this?" "I don't know if anyone can be ready," Thelen replied quietly. "But we don't have a choice. We have to see it through." With a deep breath, he pushed open the door, the stone shifting effortlessly under his touch. The chamber inside was vast, its walls lined with ancient carvings and glowing runes. The light here wasn't natural, but seemed to emanate from the very stone itself, casting everything in an ethereal glow. As they stepped inside, the temperature dropped, and the hum of the island's power grew louder, as if they were walking through the heartbeat of the world itself. The chamber stretched infinitely in all directions, but at its center was a pool of liquid light, rippling gently like water, though it gave no reflection. "This is the heart of Aradai," Selenia said, her voice reverberating in the quiet room. "This is where the island's true memory lies." Thelen stepped closer to the pool, mesmerized by its soft glow. As he did, the surface of the pool rippled, and suddenly, the chamber around them began to shift. The walls blurred, and images flickered to life in the air. The memories of the island began to unfold before their eyes. The first memory. The first memory they saw was that of a girl young, her face bright with hope, walking through a forest much like the one they had just traversed. Her hair was dark, her eyes filled with wonder. She touched the bark of a tree, and as her fingers brushed against it, the tree seemed to glow, its leaves vibrating with light. The girl smiled, and Thelen could hear her voice, though it was faint. "The island will be our home," she said, her voice soft, but filled with certainty. "We will live here. We will build something that will last forever." Then, the vision shifted, and the girl was gone. In her place stood figures tall, shadowy forms, their faces obscured by hoods, as they stood in a circle. They held something between them, a key that glowed with the same light as the pool. The vision blurred again, and the figures vanished, leaving only the key, which slowly sank into the earth. The second memory. The next memory was of a man, standing alone on a cliff overlooking the sea. His hair was silver, his eyes sharp and watchful. The wind whipped around him, carrying with it the scent of the ocean, the smell of the earth. The man gazed out at the horizon, where the sky met the sea in a seamless expanse of blue. There was something ancient about him, something that felt timeless. "The island is both our sanctuary and our prison," he muttered, his voice carrying an undercurrent of weariness. "We must never let it fall. We must keep the balance." As he spoke, the earth beneath his feet trembled, and a massive stone door appeared behind him, opening slowly to reveal an underground chamber. The man stepped forward, vanishing into the darkness beyond. The third memory. The final memory was more fragmented, pieces of it scattered like leaves in the wind. They saw the Watchers, the ancient guardians of Aradai, standing before the stone doors, their faces filled with fear. The air around them crackled with energy, a storm forming in the distance. One of the Watchers, an old woman with pale eyes, spoke urgently. "The island cannot remember what it was meant to be. We must seal it away, before it awakens fully. The memories, they are too dangerous." The other Watchers hesitated, but they obeyed. The doors closed, and the earth swallowed the memory whole. The truth revealed. As the memories faded, the pool of light before them began to glow brighter, swirling with energy. It was as though the island itself was speaking to them, pouring its secrets into the very fabric of their beings. The air grew heavier, the hum of the island growing louder, until it was almost deafening. Then, a voice rang out, deep and resonant, filling the chamber with its power. "You have awakened the truth." The ground beneath them rumbled, and the walls of the chamber shifted once more. Thelen and Lyra found themselves standing in a vast, infinite expanse, the very heart of the island. The voice spoke again, its tone heavier this time. Aradai was never just a land, nor a dream. It was a living memory, a place where the past, present, and future converged. It was never meant to be whole. It was always meant to remain fragmented, a place where time could be rewritten. Thelen felt a rush of understanding. The island wasn't just a place. It was a gateway, a crossroads between worlds, between what was, what is, and what could be. You have made a choice, the voice continued. But the choice comes with a price. You have awakened the island, but now, you must choose whether to keep it bound to this world or let it slip away once more, forgotten. The chamber began to pulse with a blinding light, and the memories of Aradai, its past, its present, and its future swirled around them like a storm. Lyra turned to Thelen, her eyes wide with realization. We can't just leave, can we? Thelen nodded, his heart heavy. No. We've already made our choice. We've already become part of Aradai's story. But now, we have to decide what comes next. The final act, the choice to remember. The light in the heart of Aradai was blinding, not harsh, but all-encompassing, like the very fabric of reality was unraveling and being rewritten in an instant. Thelen and Lyra stood side by side, the weight of the choice pressing down on them, the island's pulse echoing in their hearts. The voice of the island, ancient and knowing, had given them the truth, but now they had to decide whether to keep Aradai alive or let it fade away once more. Lyra stood still, her hand gripping Thelen's, her eyes wide but resolute. The air around them hummed, the very ground beneath them vibrating with the raw energy of Aradai's forgotten past. I never imagined it would come to this, Lyra whispered. That we would be the ones to decide if this place lives or dies. Thelen's heart beat heavily in his chest. He had come here seeking answers, seeking closure, but what he found was a living, breathing world, a world that wasn't ready to be forgotten. And yet, the cost of keeping it alive was not something he could ignore. We've already made the choice to awaken it, Thelen said softly, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. But now, we must decide, do we allow it to be part of our world, or do we let it return to its sleep? Lyra turned to him, her eyes glistening. Can we ever truly let it go? Thelen gazed into the distance, watching as the swirling lights of Aradai's memories began to coalesce around them, a soft hum filling the air. The island was alive with the memories of its past, its present, and its future. It was more than just a place. It was a bridge between worlds and, for better or worse, they were now the keepers of its fate. I don't know if we can, he replied. But the island has given us this power. We can either anchor it to the world above or let it slip away again, forgotten. Lyra's hand tightened around his. And if we anchor it? What happens to us? Thelen turned to her, his eyes searching hers. We become part of it. We will live with it, in it, and through it forever. But it won't be the same. The island will change. And so will we. The island's hum grew louder, and for a moment, it felt like time itself had slowed. The pool of light in the center of the chamber of truth glowed brighter, casting reflections of their memories across the walls, moments they had lived, moments they had forgotten, and moments they had yet to experience. The fifth key pulsed in Thelen's hand, the light from it merging with the glow of the island. He felt the weight of the decision. His thoughts were filled with the faces of everyone he had met along this journey, the people of Windmere, the watchers of the island, Celia's fading smile, and Lyra's quiet determination. "This is not just about us," Lyra said, her voice breaking through his thoughts. "This is about everyone who has ever dreamed of this place, everyone who has ever touched the island, even if they don't know it." Thelen nodded slowly. "And if we let it go, if we choose to let the island fade away, then the memories will be lost. Not just for us, but for everyone who comes after." Lyra's eyes softened as she turned to face the glowing doorway of light that beckoned them forward. "Maybe some things are meant to remain in dreams, Thelen. Maybe Aradai is just too much for the world to hold." They stood there, the weight of the world pressing down on them. In this moment, they were no longer just dreamers. They were part of the island, connected to it in a way they had never imagined. Thelen took a deep breath, feeling the pull of both worlds. He could feel the island calling to him, calling to them. The memories were too powerful, too deep to let go. Aradai was more than a place. It was a piece of themselves. A place that existed in their hearts and minds. "I think," Thelen said, his voice low, "I think we have to keep it alive. Not for us, but for everyone who will come after." Lyra looked at him, her eyes filled with understanding. She smiled softly, a sense of peace washing over her. "Then we will carry it with us. Together." With that, they stepped forward, hand in hand, toward the heart of Aradai, the final choice before them. As they passed through the swirling light, the island's pulse quickened, the energy swirling around them like a storm. The light grew brighter, blinding them for a moment, and then, suddenly, they were standing in the heart of Windmere again, the familiar sight of the village before them. But something had changed. The lighthouse glowed brighter than ever, its light reaching out toward the horizon like a beacon. The village was alive, its streets humming with energy, as if it too was waking from a long slumber. The air was charged, filled with the soft hum of the island's memory. Thelen looked around, his heart swelling with a strange mixture of relief and wonder. He could feel Aradai's presence within him, in the air around him, in the ground beneath his feet. It was no longer just a dream. It was real, and it was a part of him. Lyra stood beside him, her hand still in his. "We did it," she said softly, looking out over the town. "The island is awake." Thelen nodded, a smile tugging at his lips. "Yes. And now, it's our story to tell." In the distance, they saw figures gathering, villagers, travelers, and those who had been drawn to the island's power. The island was no longer a place hidden in dreams. It had become part of the world above, and it was alive in ways no one could have predicted. The last door had been opened, and now, the island's story would be told for generations to come.